The chain dropped. The auctioneer expected money. The crowd expected another transaction, but Lucan Voss was not buying anything. He was returning something that never should have been taken. And Urzasha, for the first time in 2 years, looked at someone without calculating how to escape from him. Thornwall's market happened every first moon of the month. The uneven stone square sat at the center of the village, where wind came down from the mountain carrying the smell of ice and old straw. It was a border place, the kind where the capital's laws arrived late and left before lunch. All kinds of traders showed up there. Some sold coal, some sold cattle. Some sold things that should not be sold. Lucan Voss came to buy coal. He was 43 years old, with wide hands covered in old burn scars and a way of walking that said he was in no hurry for anything. He was a blacksmith, or had been, before the forge went cold 3 days ago, when the last grain of coal ran out, and he admitted he needed to leave the house. Leaving the house was getting harder every month. The forge had belonged to Mira, too. His wife had chosen that spot with him, had put her own hands into the mortar of the walls. Mira had died 3 years ago, and the forge was the last thing in the world that still carried her fingerprints. Lucan woke up every day to the smell of metal and coal and pretended it was enough. It wasn't. But the forge was cold, so he went to the market. He heard the auction before he saw it. That was not unusual in Thornwall. The village sat 3 days from the buffer zone, the polite name for the territories where the Orc clans had been pushed after the last war. A peace on paper that was, in practice, a slow defeat, managed with documents instead of swords. Every so often, labor traders showed up with orcs captured along the zone's edges, sold with forged papers that called them voluntary contractors. Nobody believed that, but it was easier to buy than to question. The platform was a board of damp wood in the northeast corner of the square. There were 4 people in chains on it, 2 battered human men, a confused old goblin, and her. Lucan stopped. She was standing, but not the way people who are standing usually stand. It was the posture of someone who had decided she would not fall, not out of pride, but out of pure refusal to give anyone that satisfaction. The chains on her wrists were too thick, made for something larger. Her skin was dark green, the shade of forest after rain, covered in marks both old and new. Her hair had been cut without ceremony, but her eyes were amber, deep and heavy like resin warmed by the sun, and they swept the crowd with an attention that no humiliation could erase. She was not looking at the auctioneer. She was looking at the exits. Lucan looked at the sack of coal he still needed to buy, looked at the platform, made the calculation he knew was insane. The forge was worth 8 silver coins. There had been an offer from a merchant in Valcrest that he had never considered, because selling the forge would be like erasing Mira from the world. The auctioneer was asking 6 coins to start. Lucan closed his eyes for 1 second. Behind his eyelids, he did not see the forge. He saw Mira, the way she smiled when he was about to do something right that would cost him dearly. The smile that said, "I knew you were going to do this. You always said I had a problem with injustice," he thought. He raised his hand. In that moment, as the auctioneer stared at him in surprise and the crowd murmured, Lucan felt something strange, a feeling that he had been here before, not in that market, not on that day, but in that exact moment of choice. As if his whole life had been a road leading to that one raised hand. It wasn't memory, it was something else. Something he would only understand much later. The chain hit the stone floor with a dry clank. Urzasha did not step back. She stood on the platform, looking at her free hands as if she did not quite believe it yet. The red-coated merchant grumbled while counting the coins. The crowd drifted away to other stalls, already bored. Lucan stood 2 steps from her. He said nothing. He had learned from Mira that some things need space before they need words. So he stayed there, not stepping closer, not reaching out, not smiling the way people smile when they want to seem kind but are waiting for gratitude. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked toward him. They went back on foot. Lucan had sold his horse 6 months ago, along the dirt road that grew narrower the farther they got from Thornwall. Oak trees lined the path, their leaves fallen too early that year. The wind smelled of wet earth, and the snow promised for the following week. She never asked where they were going. He only realized that later, already near the house. She had simply followed, with the posture of someone who accepts the next step without knowing it. Not trust, not yet, but the practical decision that any road was better than the platform. The house was small. 2 rooms, a roof that leaked in the left corner, a fireplace that warmed badly in winter. Without the forge out back, there was an empty space that Lucan avoided looking at directly. He opened the door and lit the lamp without drama. "The bed is there," he said, pointing. "I sleep on the bench by the fireplace. There's soup from yesterday in the pot. Outhouse is the cabin out back." Urzasha stood in the entrance. The amber eyes moved across the space with that calculated attention. Mapping, he realized, checking for threats, finding the exits. "You can lock the bedroom from the inside," he said without looking at her. "There's a bolt. I put it there myself." A pause. Why? It was the first time she had spoken since the market. Her voice was lower than he expected, with a roughness that was not anger. It was the sound of a voice that had gone too long without use. "Because you don't know me," Lucan answered, tending to the fire. "And it makes no sense to trust someone you don't know." Silence, but a different texture than before. "Humans don't usually think that way," she said. "Humans are usually idiots," he replied. And for the first time in a long while, the corner of Urzasha's mouth moved. It didn't quite become a smile. It was the shape a smile has when it doesn't yet have the courage to show itself fully, like a sprout feeling the sun for the first time, not yet sure it can trust it. She came inside. He warmed the soup. They ate in silence, and the silence was good. That night, before sleeping on the bench by the fireplace, Lucan lay looking at the ceiling and trying to understand that strange feeling from the market, that certainty of having lived that moment before. There was something in her amber gaze that he recognized without being able to name, as if the two of them were parts of a story that had begun before either of them noticed. In the bedroom, Urzasha lay awake for hours, learning the sounds of the new house, learning that the third step creaked, that the wind hit differently on the north side. That silence here did not mean ambush. It took time. But sleep came. On the 3rd morning, Urzasha woke before the sun and went to the kitchen. Lucan was bent over the sink, with a look of concentration that did not match such a simple task. When she stepped closer, she understood. His hands were a map of damage, old burns that had left shiny, tight skin over the knuckles, an index finger crooked, broken once, and badly healed. In the palms, new red cracks that bled in the creases. Blacksmith's hands without a forge are like rivers without a bed. "Sit," she said. Lucan turned, surprised. "Sit," she repeated, not a command, a diagnosis. He sat without questioning. There was something in her voice when she used that tone, not the authority of someone who gives orders, but the authority of someone who knows. The kind of voice doctors have when they are working, the voice that says, "Trust the process." She worked with quiet efficiency. She warmed lard between her fingers before pressing it into the cracks, then wrapped the palms in linen with firm, practical knots. Lucan stayed still, watching her hands move over his with a precision that only comes from years of practice. There was something strange about being cared for. He had forgotten what it felt like. "You were a healer," he said, not a question. "I was," she confirmed without stopping. "For your clan?" "Yes." She kept going, and the words came out at the rhythm of the work. "I learned from the age of 7, my mother, before her my grandmother." Her fingers worked the lard in slow circles. "We had a name for it, Grakveth. It means, roughly, the art of making the body remember it knows how to heal itself." "Beautiful," said Lucan. She tested his tone. Finding no irony, she returned to work. "Your hands will crack again without the forge," she said. "I know. Will you get another one?" Lucan looked at the ceiling. The old forge was Mira's too, he said, and it was the first time he had said that name to Urzasha. She chose the spot with me, put her hands in the mortar. A pause. Selling it was like erasing the last time she touched something that still exists. Urzasha stopped for a moment. She did not start again right away. "I understand," she said quietly. And by her tone, he knew she meant it. Not the polite empathy of someone who has never lost anything, but the recognition of someone who carries their own erasures. She finished the bandage with a firm knot. Then, for the first time, she did not pull away immediately. She left her hands lightly resting on his for 1 second. Not affection, not yet, but acknowledgement. "I saw your pain, and it is real." "Grakveth," Lucan repeated softly, testing the syllables, and Urzasha's smile reached a little farther than it had the night before. That afternoon, while she went out to the yard and he stayed in the kitchen, Lucan noticed something. There was a quality to the way she worked, in the linen knots, in the exact warmth of the lard, in the careful choice of every herb she had already begun separating in the folds of her belt. An ancient knowledge passed hand to hand through generations, a knowledge someone had tried to erase. Someone had tried, but she was still standing, and her hands remembered everything. On the 7th night, the rain arrived hard. Lucan fixed the leak in the left corner with improvised mortar. Urzasha watched in silence, passing tools when he asked, holding the lamp when he needed to see better. It was the first time they had worked together on something. Afterward, they sat by the fireplace with ginger tea she had found in the yard, dried and forgotten, and the silence between them had changed. "Less weight, more space. My full name is Urzasha Velmora," she said, looking at the fire. Velmora was the clan name. It means children of the green tide. A pause. "There is no one left with that name except me." Lucan did not say, "I'm sorry." Instead, "What was the clan like?" And she spoke. She spoke the way it happens when a memory has been dammed up too long, with details that come before the feelings, as if the mind needs to take inventory before it can feel. The Velmora clan lived on the edges of the Grey Marsh, northwest of the buffer zone, seasonal nomads, healers, not warriors. "When the war came," she said, and her voice went flat and careful, like someone walking on ice, "we had no reason to be a target. We had no coveted territory, no gold." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "But we had the marsh, and the marsh was in the path of the 5th Regiment." Lucan knew the 5th Regiment. Everyone on the human side knew it. They had been proclaimed heroes. He stayed quiet and let the shame take the space it deserved. "I survived because I was far away gathering herbs," she continued. "When I came back, the camp was—" She paused, choosing, "gone. I was alone for nearly a year. Then they caught me in a village where I was trying to trade roots for food. They said I was stealing." "You weren't." "No." She lifted her eyes. But their version was more convenient. Lucan set his cup on the table with excessive care. "Velmora," he said slowly. "Children of the green tide." "Yes." "Then you still have the name," he said, "even if it's only you." Urzasha was quiet. The fire threw amber light across her face, and for a moment he saw not the cautious woman who mapped exits. He saw someone who had once been whole and was trying to find out if that was still possible. "I never thought of it that way," she said. "Mira," said Lucan. "She died 3 years ago, but her name still exists because I still say it." She looked at him with that searching expression, then softer. "What were you before you were a blacksmith?" he thought honestly. "I don't think I know yet," he answered, and somehow that answer was exactly right. That night, after the rain had thinned and the house had gone quiet, Urzasha lay awake, listening to the wind. Back in the village, deep in the grey marsh, the elders had said the wind carried the voices of those who had gone. She had never truly believed it, but that night, for just 1 second, she thought she heard her mother's voice. It said only, "It isn't over yet." In the 2nd week, Urzasha began going out to the woods at dawn. Lucan left the door unlatched and placed her boots near the entrance. She came back with her hands full, roots, bark, fungi growing at the bases of oak trees. The yard gained a small, improvised garden with stick markers and names written on stones in charcoal, some in common tongue, others in Orc. Lucan began to help. One day, while she explained the properties of a twisted root, he tried to plant a bulb the way he imagined was correct. She adjusted the depth with an efficiency that left no room for awkwardness. He replanted. She approved with a nod. It was in that moment, both of them kneeling in the cold earth, shoulders close, that Lucan made the mistake. "You learned so much for someone who came from a people without cities," he said without thinking. The words came out before he could weigh them. The kind of sentence that carries a prejudice you didn't even know you had, dressed up as a compliment. The silence that followed was different from all the ones before. Urzasha stopped. She set the root on the ground with a care that was the opposite of calm. It was the control of someone holding something they would rather not release near another person. "We had libraries," she said, her voice like ice, written on tree bark, centuries of medical knowledge. A pause. "The 5th Regiment burned all of it." Lucan's stomach dropped. "Urzasha, no." She stood and went inside. Lucan stayed kneeling in the earth for a long moment, feeling the specific weight of having hurt someone without meaning to, which is different from hurting someone on purpose, because there is no one else to redirect the blame onto. It stays entirely with you. He went in after a few minutes. She was in the kitchen, her back to him, moving with sharper gestures than usual. "I said something stupid," he said. "That wasn't a compliment. It was prejudice dressed as a compliment. And that's worse than plain prejudice because it's harder to identify." A pause. "I'm sorry." Urzasha kept working for a moment. Then her shoulders dropped. Not completely, but enough. "You're not the first," she said. "I know." He went to the chair and sat. "But I want to be different, and for that, I need you to correct me when I'm wrong." She turned slowly, the testing look again, looking for the agenda, not finding one. "All right," she said at last. They returned to work in the garden the next day, with something new between them. More honest. He knew less, but wanted to learn. She knew more, and had decided provisionally to teach. That afternoon, while she prepared a poultice for his knee, Lucan realized he had spent 3 hours without thinking once about the lost forge. And Urzasha realized she had spent 3 hours without checking the exits. Border villages have long memories and short imaginations. They remember everything that confirmed their fears and forget everything that contradicted them. It is a structure of memory built to support one specific story, and anything that doesn't fit that story is treated as a threat. Lucan knew exactly how Thornwall thought, so he was not surprised when the whispers began. First Beryl the butcher, who stopped greeting him, then the baker's wife, who served with her back half-turned, then the children, who followed at a safe distance, repeating what they had heard from their parents. Urzasha walked in silence through all of it with the posture of the auction platform. But Lucan watched her hands, closed lightly, not in fists, but in the gesture of someone holding themselves together. When they got home, she went straight to the garden. Lucan stayed in the kitchen making dinner, a more careful stew this time, with herbs from her garden that were already beginning to grow. When she came in through the dark, there were 2 bowls on the table and the fire lit. She sat, she ate, she was quiet. "This is going to continue," she said. "Yes," Lucan answered. "And it will get worse." "Probably." She looked at him. "Did you calculate that when you took me from the market?" "I calculated that it was the right thing to do," he said. "The consequences I calculated less carefully." An honest pause. "But I calculated that I could live with them." Urzasha looked at her bowl. "Why me?" The question had layers. It wasn't just, "Why did you help me?" It was, "What did you see?" "You were looking at the exits," he said. "Not at the auctioneer, at the exits." He rested his elbows on the table. "Someone who is still looking for a way out, still wants to live. Someone who still wants to live deserves to have someone beside them." Urzasha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said more softly, "I looked at you too." Lucan waited. "On the platform," she continued, "before you raised your hand, you were looking at me with an expression I had never seen on a human before. It wasn't pity, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. As if you knew what I was feeling, because you had felt something like it yourself." "When Mira died," he said slowly, "I spent 6 months without leaving the house. Not because I couldn't, because the world outside kept going, and she was no longer in it, and that felt like an insult I didn't know how to forgive." A pause. I felt exposed, like everyone could see that I was broken. Urzasha looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her before. Not the testing look, not the analysis. It was something else. It was the look of someone who, for the first time in a very long while, recognizes themselves in another person's face. That night, after she went to her room, Lucan sat by the fire for hours. He thought about the strange feeling at the market, that certainty of having lived that moment before. Now he was beginning to understand. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a spell. It was the kind of recognition that only happens between two broken pieces that fit together. And that, he realized, was more frightening than any spirit from the marsh. Corvath Drell arrived on a Tuesday morning. Snow covered Thornwall with the false quiet that winter uses as a mask. Lucan was in the yard splitting wood when he saw the wagon. He recognized the red coat before he recognized the face. 3 men, Corvath up front, 2 larger ones behind with the expressions of paid work. Lucan set the axe on the stump and went to the gate. "Voss," said Corvath with the smile of someone about to be reasonable in a way that would cost someone else dearly. "I came to settle a business matter. I have no business with you." "You do." Corvath pulled an envelope from his coat. The work contract for the specimen designated Urzasha was filed at the registry. "Your market transaction was irregular. You have no transfer license." "It wasn't a work contract," said Lucan. "It was a person being sold illegally." "Being human is a specific legal classification," Corvath replied, with the technical pleasure of a man who had learned to use the right words to do wrong things. "The specimen in question—" "Urzasha," Lucan interrupted. "Her name is Urzasha Velmora." Corvath blinked. "The fact is that you seized property that was not yours. The transaction is not valid. I came to take back what is mine." Lucan stood at the gate. Inside, something very cold and very calm. Not anger, the perception that a decision was being confirmed. "She is not here," he said. "It was a lie." Urzasha was in the kitchen. She had heard the wagon, he knew. She was in that posture of someone calculating exits. "That's fine," said Corvath, gesturing to the 2 men. "We can wait." "You can wait on the road," Corvath's smile cooled. "You can challenge it in court," said Lucan. "If your documents are legitimate, a judge reviews them. If they aren't, and I intend to find out, you have a much bigger problem than me." A tense pause. Corvath pocketed the envelope. "You're making enemies, blacksmith." "I already had few friends. The loss is manageable." The wagon left through the snow. Lucan stood at the gate until it disappeared around the curve. Then he went back inside. Urzasha was standing in the hallway. "He'll come back," she said. "He will," Lucan agreed, "with more people. You should go to Valcrest before he does. Check the documents." Her voice was precise, that of someone who had already analyzed the problem while he was at the gate. "Border registries, like the ones he uses, are often irregular. If the filing is false, there is a trail." She crossed her arms. "I'm going with you, Urzasha." "I'm not asking permission," she said calmly. "I'm saying what I'm going to do." Lucan looked at her. The woman who had arrived mapping exits, who had spent weeks weighing every word before speaking it, now standing in the hallway, saying what I'm going to do, with the ease of someone who had remembered who she was. "All right," he said. "We'll go together." And she nodded. And there was something in her amber eyes in that moment. Not gratitude, not relief. It was determination. It was Urzasha Velmora, healer of the Green Tide clan, deciding that this time she would not wait for others to decide her fate. Valcrest was 2 days down the road. Old Hast had appeared on the morning of their departure with a grey horse tied to the gate, and no explanation beyond a nod of the head that could have meant many things. Lucan accepted without asking. At the Valcrest registry, a young and meticulous clerk examined the documents. Urzasha had kept the copy that the notary was required by law to give the contractor, folded inside her boot since the first day, without telling anyone. When she placed the paper on the clerk's table, Lucan looked at her. "I kept it because I knew I might need it," she said simply. "Healers learn not to throw away anything that might be medicine later." The clerk took an hour. The registry that had filed the document had been sealed for irregularities 6 weeks earlier. But more importantly, Urzasha pointed to something the clerk confirmed. The filing date was earlier than the creation of the very standard form being used. Someone had forged it with the wrong template. "Invalid document," said the clerk, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finds an error others missed. "I'll issue an official declaration." On the way back between the pine trees, Lucan turned to her on the horse. "How long did you know?" "Since the 2nd week," said Urzasha. "I saw the date, but I needed someone with legal authority to confirm it." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you were still deciding if it was worth fighting," she said, without accusation in her tone. "I wanted to wait until you were sure." There was something in that sentence that reached Lucan in a way he was not entirely prepared to receive. She had protected him. She had carried the information in silence so as not to pressure him before he was ready. Grakveth, he thought. Making the body remember, it knows how to heal itself. She had been doing that for him too, without him noticing. Corvath came back the following Friday, this time with 5 men and 6 Thornwall neighbours as witnesses. Lucan recognized them all. Beralt, the Mill brothers, Old Hast, who had come but stood slightly apart from the others, with an expression that was not yet a position. Lucan stepped out through the front door. Urzasha stepped out behind him. That morning he had said it would be safer for her to stay inside. She had answered, making tea without drama. "I don't hide behind anyone while they decide my fate. Never again." And he had said simply, "All right." Corvath stopped the wagon with the smile of a man who had come prepared. "We have a declaration from the Valcrest registry," said Lucan. "The document is invalid. Date predates the form itself. Forgery confirmed by an official clerk." Corvath's smile hesitated for the first time. "That can be contested." "It can," said Urzasha. Everyone looked at her. It was the first time she had spoken directly to Corvath, and there was something in her voice that made the air around them go still. "It can be contested," she repeated, stepping forward. "And if it is, I will be in that courtroom. With the original document, with the clerk's declaration, and with the name of every person who saw me in chains on that platform." Her amber eyes met Corvath's without blinking. "I am Urzasha Velmora, healer of the Green Tide clan. I spent 2 years being treated as an object, and I learned that objects don't speak in courtrooms." A pause. "I am not an object." Lucan stepped to her side, not in front, beside, and looked at the neighbours, one by one. "I did not buy you, Urzasha," he said, and the words were for her, not for the crowd. But the crowd heard, and that was what they were for. "I saved you. And there is an enormous difference between the two things. Whoever buys wants possession. Whoever saves wants you to be free." It was Old Hast who moved first, 2 steps to the left, separating himself quietly from Corvath's group. He said nothing, but the gesture was enough. Corvath pocketed the envelope for the last time. Spring arrived the way it always arrives after a hard winter, not all at once, not with fanfare, in small, stubborn increments that pile up until one day you look out the window and realize the world changed while you were paying attention to something else. First came the sprouts in Urzasha's garden. She spent an entire morning crouched in the soft earth, checking each small marker with an attention that Lucan had learned to recognize as emotion, disguised as a task. When the horsetail appeared, small, green and unlikely, she looked at it for a time that was too long to be only botanical satisfaction. "Velmora," said Lucan, passing with a cup of tea made the way she liked it. No sugar, extra ginger. The exact temperature he had taken 3 weeks to get right. She took the cup without looking up. "Velmora," she repeated softly, like a confirmation, like someone checking whether a name still fits in their own mouth. Thornwall still whispered, but there was something different in the texture of the whispers. Not acceptance, not yet, but the uncomfortable perception that perhaps the story they had been telling themselves was not the only possible one. Beralt had greeted Lucan 2 weeks ago, just a nod, but a willing one. And then there were the Thursdays. A mother had shown up with a feverish child, having heard something about the orc at the blacksmith's. Urzasha had treated him without comment, refused payment, sent the boy home with a small pouch of herbs and precise instructions. 2 days later, the child had improved. The mother came back with bread and an ashamed nod that was, in its own way, an apology for everything that had gone unsaid. Urzasha accepted the bread. Now there was a quiet line on Thursday mornings. That spring afternoon, sitting on the back steps with a view of the blooming garden, the low sun tinting everything amber, the same color as her eyes, and Lucan had stopped trying not to think about that at least 3 weeks ago. There was a silence of the good kind, the kind that does not need filling. "Can I ask you something?" said Urzasha. "Always." "When you sold the forge," she paused, "did you know what you were giving up?" "I knew it was the forge," he said. "I didn't know what I was getting in return." "And now?" He looked at the garden, at the herbs in careful rows, at the stones with names in common tongue and in orc, which he had learned to pronounce even if crookedly, at the 2 cups in the space between them, at her hand, 12 inches from his, resting on the step. "Now I know," he said. A pause. "Lucan," she said, and there was something different in her tone, something softer and more exposed than he had heard from her before. "You don't need a forge to be a blacksmith. The forge is where you work. What you do with the metal, that stays in your hands." He looked at her. "You spent weeks healing my hands," she said simply. "I was healing what was inside them." There was something in that sentence, its precision, its care, that reached Lucan in a way he did not try to deflect this time. He let it stay. "My mother had a saying," Urzasha continued. "A tree alone is a tree. A forest is a choice." Lucan repeated the words slowly. "She was wise." "She was." A pause with a smile inside. "You would have liked her. She would have found me slow with herbs. Definitely." The sun kept dropping. The cricket started before dark. Somewhere in the village, a child shouted in play. The kind of happy shout that is unmistakable. Lucan moved his hand the 12 inches. Urzasha did not move hers. She did not need to. It was already there. As if she had also measured the distance and reached the same conclusion at the same time. They stayed like that, as the sky moved from amber to purple to deep blue. 2 people who had arrived at that step by different and equally broken roads, and who had chosen every day, in each small act of coal and tea and unlatched door and planted garden and corrected mistake and hand held in the snow, to build something where before there had been only ruins. Family is not what blood decides. Family is what shows up when you are on the platform and someone raises their hand, not to own you, but to say, "I see you and you matter." Family is the door with a bolt on the inside, because safety is a gift you give, not a chain you place. Family is learning the names of herbs, It is the knee that heals slowly. It is laughing in the cold after having cried at the auction. It is the hand that stays when it could have gone. Family is the garden that blooms because someone believed it was worth planting, even without knowing yet exactly what they would be harvesting. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound legacy.